The Search and Rescue Command Center at Mount Rainier National Park offered no protection from skepticism. Dr. Maya Chen stood near the back of the briefing room, her uniform pristine, but noticeably lacking the veteran patches that adorned her colleagues' sleeves. Her clipboard held meticulous notes, organized in color-coded sections that many viewed as excessive, a visible symbol of the obsession that had made her an outsider. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Around her, seasoned rangers traded stories of past rescues and unlikely survivals like battle honors. Their voices echoed off the wood-paneled walls as the afternoon briefing wound down. Park Ranger James Calloway gestured dramatically, recounting his famous rescue on the North Face. The other rangers leaned in, captivated by his storytelling prowess. 3 days in whiteout conditions, Calloway boasted, his weathered face animated. Found those hikers by pure instinct. Sometimes you just know where to look. Senior Ranger Eliza Weaver nodded appreciatively, adding her own tale of tracking a lost family through a spring blizzard. Maya waited silently, her detailed terrain analysis and statistical survival models tucked neatly in her folder. Her research papers on lost person behavior remained unmentioned, her expertise overshadowed by those who trusted gut feelings over science. Search Director Thomas Blackwood barely glanced at Maya as he assigned sectors for tomorrow's final sweep. The Delmer family, father, mother, and 2 teenage children, had been missing for 9 days after a sudden storm engulfed the mountain's eastern ridge. After extensive searching, the official operation was winding down. Tomorrow would mark the transition from rescue to recovery. Sector 5, Weaver and Martinez. Final sweep of Eagle Pass. Blackwood's assignments continued methodically. Sector 6, Calloway and Johnson. Check the caves one last time, then we're calling it. Maya's hand rose before she could reconsider. The movement caught Blackwood's attention, causing a brief pause in his rhythm. Dr. Chen, he acknowledged, not bothering to hide his impatience. Director, I've analyzed the Delmer family's digital trail and cross-referenced it with the latest meteorological data, Maya said, her voice steady despite the dismissive glances exchanged around her. Their last photos show landmarks that place them in this drainage system, not where we've been searching. She stepped forward, unfolding a topographical map marked with red lines and annotated with timestamps. If they sought shelter from the storm, statistical models indicate they would have descended to this canyon area, not continued along the ridge as we've assumed. The room's atmosphere shifted from boredom to mild irritation. Calloway didn't bother hiding his eye roll. Data again, Chen? We've had boots on the ground for 9 days. If they were in that canyon, we'd have found signs by now. Not necessarily. Maya countered, pointing to specific terrain features. This area has multiple cave systems that wouldn't be visible from standard aerial surveys. And the family's social media history shows the father researched these specific geological features before their trip. Director Blackwood sighed, the sound carrying the weight of a man who'd made too many difficult calls in his career. Dr. Chen, I appreciate your thoroughness, but we've covered every realistic survival zone. 9 days in these conditions. He left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung heavily in the air. Maya pressed on, undeterred. Sir, I've developed a new search algorithm based on. That's enough, Blackwood cut her off. We're not extending the search based on computer models. I need experienced eyes out there, not theories. He turned back to his roster. Dr. Chen, you'll assist at base camp tomorrow. Coordinate communications. The assignment was clearly meant to keep her out of the way, a desk job while the real rescuers completed their work. Several rangers avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the public dismissal, but unwilling to challenge it. As the briefing concluded, Maya carefully refolded her maps and tucked them into her binder. The other rangers dispersed quickly, discussing dinner plans and tomorrow's weather forecast. Nobody invited Maya to join them. Senior Ranger Eliza Weaver paused briefly by Maya's side. "Look, Chen, I know you mean well," she said quietly, "but sometimes you need to accept the reality of what we do. Not everyone can be saved, no matter how many algorithms you run." Maya nodded politely but said nothing. She'd heard variations of this sentiment throughout her career. Well-intentioned advice to stop being so obsessive, to trust experience over data, to accept the limitations of search and rescue operations. Outside, rain had begun to fall again. A persistent drizzle that would turn to snow at higher elevations. Maya walked alone to her small cabin at the edge of the ranger compound. Unlike most of her colleagues who shared the communal lodge, she preferred the solitude of the isolated cabin. It gave her space to work without interruption, without the constant reminder that she didn't quite fit in. The cabin was Spartan but organized with military precision. One wall was covered entirely with maps of Mount Rainier, overlaid with transparent sheets marking statistical distribution patterns for lost hikers. Another held weather data spanning the 9 days since the Delmer family's disappearance. Her laptop sat open on a small desk, running complex simulations that incorporated terrain features, weather conditions, and human behavior models. Maya didn't bother changing out of her uniform before returning to her analysis. She'd spent 3 years developing software that could identify potential survival zones that traditional search methods might miss. The program integrated thousands of historical search and rescue cases, analyzing patterns that the human eye couldn't detect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her colleagues called it overkill, called her paranoid. Digital Doom's Chen was the nickname she wasn't supposed to know about, of reference to her persistent warnings about worst-case scenarios and her reliance on technology over Ranger intuition. But Maya had seen too many failures in her previous role with Coast Guard rescue. Too many cases where searchers gave up too soon or looked in the wrong places because they trusted instinct over evidence. She'd promised herself never to make those mistakes again. The Delmer family parents, Mark and Sarah, teenagers Aiden and Emma, smiled from the photo Maya had pinned to her evidence board. An ordinary family on what should have been a routine hiking trip. Mark was an experienced outdoorsman. Sarah, a meticulous planner. The teenagers were athletic and had completed wilderness survival courses. They didn't fit the profile of typical victims. And something about the search hadn't felt right from the beginning. The Rangers had focused on the ridgeline where the family's car had been found, but Maya's analysis of their last uploaded photos suggested they'd traveled farther east before the storm hit. Her software continued running simulations, calculating survival probabilities based on changing weather conditions, terrain features, and the family's known equipment. The official search assumed the Delmers had continued along the main trail when the storm hit. But Maya's analysis of Mark Delmar's online activities showed he had researched an old mining trail that cut through the eastern canyon, a trail no longer on official park maps. A notification pinged on her computer. The latest simulation had finished processing. Maya leaned forward, studying the results with intense focus. The program identified 3 zones with elevated survival probability, 2 that had already been searched thoroughly, and 1 in the eastern canyon that had received only cursory attention. Maya overlaid the results with the park's official search grid. The eastern canyon had been designated low priority from the beginning, based on the assumption that no experienced hiker would descend into its steep terrain during a storm. But what if they'd already been on that trail when the storm hit? What if they'd sought shelter in one of the abandoned mining structures the historical records mentioned? Maya pulled up satellite imagery, examining the canyon area pixel by pixel. Most of it was obscured by dense forest canopy, but there were clearings that could contain structures. She checked the search records again. Teams had done a flyover on day 3, but reported no signs of activity. No ground team had entered the canyon itself. The probability was low. After 9 days, survival chances dwindled to nearly zero, especially with the fluctuating temperatures and limited supplies the family would have carried. But nearly zero wasn't the same as zero. Maya printed her findings and compiled them into a report, knowing as she did so that it would likely be ignored. Like her previous analyses, Director Blackwood had made his decision. Tomorrow would be the final day of active searching, and then the Delmer case would join the tragic statistics of wilderness deaths, unless someone checked the canyon. Unless someone refused to give up. On that fraction of a percentage point that separated nearly impossible from confirmed. Maya stared at the map for a long time, tracing the rugged contour lines of the eastern canyon with her finger. The route would be dangerous, especially alone. It violated protocols. It would likely end her already tenuous position with the Park Service. But if there was even a chance, however small, that the Delmer family had survived, how could she not try? She made her decision shortly after midnight. The final search would begin at dawn. By then, Maya planned to be already deep in the eastern canyon, following the path that everyone else had dismissed as impossible. She packed methodically first aid supplies, emergency rations, multiple communication devices, extra batteries, specialized climbing gear for the canyon's steep walls. Everything went into her rescue pack in a specific order, positioned for optimal weight distribution and accessibility. Maya studied the weather forecast one final time. Conditions would be challenging but manageable cold with scattered snow showers, but no major systems moving in. She left her detailed search plan on her desk, knowing it would be found once her absence was noticed. At 3:15 a.m., Maya slipped out of her cabin and headed toward the eastern trailhead. The compound was quiet, most rangers still asleep before the final push tomorrow. A light glowed in the main lodge, probably the night supervisor monitoring communications. No one saw her leave. No one would know she was gone until morning briefing, by which time she'd be miles away, searching a sector that everyone else had written off as a statistical impossibility. The eastern trail was overgrown and difficult to follow in the pre-dawn darkness. Maya's headlamp illuminated just a few feet ahead as she picked her way through dense underbrush. According to her research, this path had once been a supply route for mining operations in the canyon, abandoned decades ago when the park was established. Her boots crunched on frozen ground as she moved steadily downward. The temperature hovered just below freezing, her breath forming clouds in the beam of her headlamp. Maya maintained a careful pace, knowing that rushing would only lead to mistakes. Her GPS device tracked her progress, the blue dot moving slowly along the planned route. As dawn broke, the full scale of the canyon revealed itself. Steep walls of weathered rock dropped nearly 1,000 feet to a narrow valley floor. A stream swollen from recent rains cut through the center. The descent would be technically challenging, requiring rappelling skills that Maya had refined during her Coast Guard years. She paused at the canyon rim, taking detailed photographs of the terrain below. Her eyes methodically scanned for any sign of human presence, disturbed vegetation, makeshift shelters, debris that didn't belong. Nothing immediately stood out, but the canyon floor remained largely obscured by trees. Maya secured her climbing rope to a sturdy pine and began her controlled descent down the canyon wall. Each movement was precise, tested before committing. Her weight. She'd seen too many rescuers become victims themselves through carelessness or overconfidence. The descent took nearly 2 hours. By the time Maya reached the canyon floor, the morning sun had risen high enough to penetrate partially through the tree cover. The temperature remained cold, but the physical exertion had kept her warm. She documented her arrival with GPS coordinates and a brief status update in her electronic log. Now began the methodical search. Maya divided the canyon floor into grid sections on her tablet, planning to clear each one systematically. She started at the western end, where the old mining trail would have emerged. The first 2 hours yielded nothing significant. The canyon showed little evidence of recent human activity, no footprints, no discarded items, no disturbed vegetation beyond. What wildlife would cause? Maya recorded everything meticulously, but felt a growing weight of doubt. Had she misinterpreted the data? Had she risked her career on a statistical anomaly? By mid-morning, her radio crackled to life. Director Blackwood's voice cut through. The static, his tone tight with controlled anger. "Dr. Chen, this is base. Respond immediately." Maya sighed, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. "Chen here. I'm in the Eastern Canyon, conducting a supplementary search." "You're in direct violation of protocol," Blackwood replied, the radio partially masking the full force of his anger. "You were assigned to base operations today." "Sir, my analysis indicated a high probability zone that hadn't been properly searched," Maya responded calmly. "I left detailed documentation of my route and reasoning." "Your analysis doesn't override direct orders, Doctor," Blackwood snapped. "You've compromised today's operation by diverting resources. Return to base immediately." Maya glanced at her GPS. She'd covered less than a third of her planned search area. "Sir, I'm requesting permission to complete my search grid. The data suggests." "Enough with the data," Blackwood interrupted. "This obsession with your algorithms is endangering yourself and disrupting a coordinated operation. Return to base, now." The finality in his tone made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Maya knew pushing further would only escalate the situation. "Understood, sir. I'll begin my return." She kept her voice professional despite the frustration building inside her. "Please note that I found no evidence of the Delmer family in sections A through F of the Eastern Canyon." "Noted," came the clipped reply. "Report your position every 30 minutes during your return journey." The radio fell silent. Maya stood motionless for a moment, disappointment washing over her. She'd risked everything on this search, and now she would return empty-handed, facing disciplinary action and the confirmation of what everyone already thought, that she was paranoid, obsessive, unable to accept reality. Maya took one last look around the canyon floor. The morning light filtered through the trees, creating dappled patterns on the frost-covered ground. She needed to start climbing back up if she wanted to reach the rim before darkness fell. She turned to begin the hike back to her rappelling point, when something caught her eye, a flash of color that didn't belong among the browns and greens of the forest floor. Maya moved closer, pushing aside a fallen branch. There, partially buried, under leaves and dirt, was a blue fabric strap. Maya carefully brushed away the debris, revealing what appeared to be a backpack strap. Her heart rate quickened as she excavated further, uncovering a small day pack, the blue matching the color of equipment the Delmers had been carrying in their last known photographs. Maya documented the discovery with her camera before carefully opening the pack. Inside she found energy bar wrappers, a water bottle with the name Emma written on it, and a family photo in a waterproof case, the Delmers standing at the park entrance, smiling in anticipation of their hike. This changed everything. The pack proved the family had indeed come through this canyon, just as her analysis had suggested. But where were they now? Maya keyed her radio, professional excitement evident in her voice, despite her effort to remain calm. "Base, this is Chen. I found evidence of the Delmer family in the Eastern Canyon. A backpack belonging to them. Partially buried, but recent." The silence stretched for several seconds before Blackwood responded. "Confirm finding. What condition?" "The pack is weathered, but intact." Contents include personal items confirming it belonged to the Delmer family. Sir, request permission to continue my search. They were here, exactly where my analysis predicted. Another pause. Maya could almost hear the mental calculations happening at the other end. Proceed with caution, Blackwood finally replied, his tone noticeably less hostile. I'm redirecting Team 3 to your location for backup. They're approximately 3 hours out from your position. Understood. I'll continue searching and maintain regular contact. With renewed purpose, Maya expanded her search from the backpack location. The discovery had vindicated her approach, but it didn't guarantee a happy ending. The pack could have been abandoned days ago. The family could still be lost, injured, or worse. Maya noticed that the ground sloped toward the stream that cut through the canyon floor. If the family had been caught here during the storm, they would have sought shelter somewhere dry, protected from the wind, ideally elevated above potential flood levels. She followed this logic, moving methodically toward the canyon wall. The stream had carved out sections of the rock face over time, creating shallow overhangs and small caves. Maya examined each one, finding nothing until she reached a section where the wall receded, forming a deeper recess partially hidden by fallen trees. As she approached, Maya noticed something that made her freeze in place, a deliberate arrangement of stones near the entrance, the kind of marker someone would create to signal their location. Not random debris, but an arrow shape pointing inward. Maya's training kicked in. She approached cautiously, aware that desperation could make people unpredictable. "Hello," she called out. "Park Ranger, is anyone there?" The silence that followed seemed absolute. Then came a sound faint, barely audible over the gurgle of the nearby stream. A human voice, weak but unmistakable. "Here. We're here." Maya moved quickly to the cave entrance, pushing aside branches that partially obscured it. Her headlamp illuminated the interior, revealing a space about 15 feet deep. And there, huddled against the back wall, were 4 figures wrapped in emergency blankets and torn pieces of camping equipment. The Delmer family alive. They were in rough condition, dehydrated, hypothermic, clearly injured, but alive after 9 days when everyone else had given up hope. Mark Delmar's leg was crudely splinted with branches and torn clothing. Sarah appeared to be the strongest, having positioned herself as a human shield against the cave opening. The teenagers, Aiden and Emma, were pale and thin but conscious. Maya immediately activated her emergency beacon and radioed Base with trembling hands. "Base, this is Chen. I found them. All 4 Delmers, alive. Repeat, I found the Delmer family alive in a cave on the eastern canyon wall. Medical attention required, but all are conscious. Send immediate extraction team with medical support." The radio exploded with activity, disbelief, questions, rapid coordination of resources. Maya tuned it out, focusing instead on the family. Before her. She unpacked her medical supplies and moved deeper into the cave. "I'm Dr. Maya Chen with Mount Rainier Search and Rescue," she said softly, kneeling beside them. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." Sarah Delmer reached out a trembling hand, grasping Maya's arm with surprising strength. "They said everyone would think we were dead. That no one would look here." Her voice was hoarse from dehydration. "But you found us. How did you find us?" Maya smiled as she began assessing their conditions, administering emergency first aid with the practiced efficiency of someone who had trained for this moment countless times. "I looked at the data," she said simply, "and the data said you could still be alive." As she worked to stabilize the family, Maya thought about all the times her colleagues had dismissed her methods, called her paranoid, relegated her to desk duties while real rescuers did the work. For the first time since joining Mount Rainier Search and Rescue, she knew with absolute certainty that her approach wasn't just valid, it was vital. Sometimes, being called paranoid was just the price of refusing to give up when everyone else had accepted defeat. Sometimes, The difference between tragedy and miracle came down to one person willing to follow the evidence where no one else would go. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the canyon a little over an hour later. By then, Maya had stabilized the Delmers as best she could with her supplies. Mark's leg was properly splinted. Everyone had been given carefully measured water and electrolytes, and their core temperatures were slowly rising with the help of heat packs. As the extraction team rappelled down from the hovering helicopter, Maya stepped back to give them room to work. Among them was Ranger Calloway, his expression a mixture of disbelief and newfound respect as he took in the scene. "Chen," he acknowledged, his usual bravado notably absent. "How did you know?" Maya glanced at her tablet with its complex algorithms and statistical models, the technology that everyone had mocked, but that had led her exactly where she needed to be. "I didn't know," she admitted quietly. "I just wasn't willing to accept that they were gone until I'd checked every possibility, even the improbable ones." As the medical team prepared the family for evacuation, Emma Delmer, the teenage daughter, who had remained mostly silent during treatment, suddenly spoke up. "Dad said you wouldn't come," she said, her voice small but clear. "After the 5th day, he said statistics were against us. That's what he teaches at the University Statistical Analysis." She looked directly at Maya. "He said the numbers meant we were already considered dead." Maya moved closer, adjusting the thermal blanket around the girl's shoulders. "Well," she replied with a small smile, "sometimes you have to look beyond the obvious numbers. Sometimes survival doesn't follow a standard distribution curve." Emma managed a weak smile in return. "You're a math nerd too." "Guilty as charged," Maya said, helping the medical team secure Emma to the extraction board. But today, being a math nerd saved 4 lives. As the Delmer family was carefully hoisted one by one into the helicopter, Maya gathered her equipment. She would climb out the way she had come in, allowing the helicopter to focus solely on the family's evacuation. Director Blackwood's voice came through on her radio once more. "Dr. Chen," he said, formality evident in his tone. "Outstanding work today." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, knowing this brief acknowledgement was likely the closest thing to an apology she would receive. "We'll have a full debrief when you return to base," he continued. "Your analysis methods—" He hesitated, clearly struggling with the next words. "Your methods merit further consideration for standard protocol." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but coming from Blackwood, it was revolutionary. Maya smiled to herself as she began the long climb back up the canyon wall. By the time she reached the top, the story of her solo rescue would have spread throughout the Park Service. They had called her paranoid. Until today, when she found the survivors everyone thought were dead. The helicopter carrying the Delmer family had barely disappeared over the canyon rim when Maya's radio crackled again. This time it was Ranger Eliza Weaver's voice that cut through the static. "Chen, do you copy? The med team is giving us preliminary reports. How did those people survive 9 days out there?" Maya adjusted her climbing harness, preparing for the ascent. "They're experienced outdoors people. Mark Delmar's leg injury prevented them from hiking out, and they lost most of their equipment crossing the stream. They rationed what little food they had and collected rainwater." "But 9 days," Weaver pressed. "The survival models say." "The models give probabilities, not certainties," Maya interrupted, a subtle confidence in her voice that hadn't been there before. "And people aren't statistics. They're variables with adaptability that can't always be quantified." The silence on the other end suggested Weaver was processing this perspective shift. Finally she responded, "Well, whatever your methods, you did good work today, Chen. Really good work." The acknowledgement warmed Maya more than she expected. She began her climb, focusing on each handhold, each foot placement. The physical challenge was welcome, after the emotional intensity of the rescue. As she ascended, she mentally reviewed what had gone right and what could have been improved, her standard practice after any operation. The statistical model had correctly identified the survival zone, but she'd nearly missed the cave entrance. Perhaps the algorithm needed adjustment to better account for natural camouflage factors in densely forested terrain. She'd been right about the family's likely path, but wrong about how far they'd traveled before the injury occurred. Each observation became a data point for future refinement. Maya reached the canyon rim as afternoon shadows lengthened across the park. The hike back to base would take another 2 hours, but for now, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate the vista before her, the sprawling wilderness that most people saw only as beautiful or dangerous, but that she experienced as a complex system of probabilities and patterns. Her radio interrupted the moment. "Dr. Chen, this is Director Blackwood. What's your position?" "Just reached the rim, sir. Beginning return to base." "Good." His tone was businesslike but lacked the dismissiveness from earlier. "The Delmers are en route to Seattle General. Initial assessment is positive for all 4. The parents are asking to speak with you when possible." "I'll visit tomorrow if medical clearance allows," Maya replied, shouldering her pack. "One more thing," Blackwood added. "There's media at base camp. The story's getting traction. 9 days, presumed dead, family of 4 found alive. It's exactly the kind of miracle story they love." Maya frowned. "Sir, it wasn't a miracle. It was methodical search based on statistical analysis and save it for the debrief, Chen." Blackwood cut in, though without hostility. "Just be prepared for questions when you get back." As Maya hiked the winding trail toward base, she thought about perception versus reality. To the public, this would become a story of miraculous survival against impossible odds. To her colleagues, it might be seen as a lucky break, a one-in-a-million shot that happened to pay off. Few would understand that the rescue was neither miracle nor luck, but the result of rigorous analysis and refusal to accept conventional assumptions. The base camp came into view just as dusk settled over the mountain. Usually quiet and orderly, today it bustled with unusual activity. News vans with satellite dishes occupied the visitor parking area. Rangers who would normally be filing reports or preparing equipment stood in clusters, talking animatedly. Everyone fell silent as Maya approached, her solitary figure emerging from the tree line. Director Blackwood intercepted her before she reached the main building, steering her toward his office. "Good work out there," he said quietly. "Medical team says another day, and we'd have lost at least 2 of them." The acknowledgement should have felt vindicating, but Maya simply nodded. "The father's leg needs surgery. Compound fracture with early signs of infection. The others are suffering from exposure and dehydration, but should recover fully." Blackwood studied her with newfound curiosity. Most people would be celebrating right now. "You just pulled off the most improbable rescue in park history." "It wasn't improbable," Maya corrected him automatically. "Just underestimated. The statistical model gave them a 4.3% survival chance at 9 days. Low, but not impossible." They reached his office, a modest room with windows overlooking the mountain. Maps covered the walls, not unlike Maya's cabin, though organized by different logic. Blackwood gestured for her to sit while he closed the door, muffling the excited voices outside. "You directly disobeyed orders," he said without preamble, leaning against his desk. "Left base without authorization, conducted a solo search in dangerous terrain, committed resources without clearance." Maya met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. Under normal circumstances, that would be grounds for immediate termination." "I understand." Blackwood sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "But these aren't normal circumstances, are they? You were right when everyone else was wrong. Your paranoid attention to detail saved 4 lives today." He turned to look out the window at the mountain silhouetted against the darkening sky. "I've been doing this job for 27 years, Chen. Lost my share, saved my share. After a while, you develop instincts, start to recognize patterns, When to push harder and when to accept that nature has won. Maya remained silent, sensing there was more coming. But today showed me something, he continued. Maybe there's room for your approach alongside the traditional methods. Maybe what looks like paranoia to seasoned rangers is actually thoroughness, taken to its logical conclusion. He turned back to face her. I'm not going to fire you. In fact, I'm creating a new position, data integration specialist for search and rescue operations. The job's yours if you want it. Maya blinked, caught off guard by the offer. What exactly would that entail? You'd work alongside traditional search teams, but with authorization to pursue analytical approaches. Develop your models, refine your algorithms, train others in your methods. If today proved anything, it's that we need both intuition and data, experience and innovation. The offer was unexpected recognition, not just of today's success, but of her entire approach to search and rescue. An acknowledgement that her differences were valuable, not just tolerable. I accept, she said simply. Blackwood nodded, seemingly relieved. Good. We'll work out the details tomorrow. For now, there's a room full of reporters out there who want to hear about today's miracle rescue. Maya stood, straightening her still muddy uniform. It wasn't a miracle, sir. It was methodical search based on statistical analysis, he finished for her, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Yes, I know. But woman uses complex algorithms to locate missing family doesn't make for exciting headlines. So just this once, let them have their miracle story. The press conference was mercifully brief. Maya answered questions with clinical precision, deflecting attempts to cast her as a hero or the rescue as divine intervention. She emphasized the Delmers' survival skills, the importance of proper preparation for wilderness expeditions, and the Park Service's commitment to developing new search techniques. When asked directly how she found the family when everyone else had given up, she paused, weighing her response carefully. I simply followed the data to its logical conclusion, she said finally. In search and rescue, we can't afford to ignore even remote possibilities when lives are at stake. By the time she escaped the media circus, exhaustion had caught up with her. Maya declined invitations to join the impromptu celebration at the Ranger's Lodge, preferring the quiet of her cabin to process the day's events. The solitude she usually cherished felt different tonight. Her small living space, with its maps and charts and computer models, seemed less like a fortress against misunderstanding and more like a laboratory of innovation. The tools that had marked her as an outsider had today proven their worth beyond question. Maya's phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for not giving up on us. The Delmers, the hospital must have passed along her contact information. Maya stared at the simple message, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in her throat. Throughout her career, she'd approached rescue as a mathematical problem to solve, a system to optimize. The human element, the raw gratitude of those saved, had always been secondary to the operational challenges. But tonight, those 9 words on her phone screen made everything real in a way that statistics never could. Maya slept deeply for the first time in weeks, her body finally surrendering to the physical and emotional demands of the day. She woke to sunlight streaming through her cabin window and the unusual sound of voices outside. Curious, she dressed quickly and stepped onto her small porch. A group of rangers stood nearby, including several who had never before ventured to her isolated cabin. They fell silent when they saw her. Ranger Calloway stepped forward, his usual swagger noticeably subdued. Morning, Chen. We thought you might want some company walking to the briefing. The gesture was transparent but genuine, an olive branch from colleagues who had previously dismissed her methods. Maya nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. I could use some coffee first. Already covered, Eliza Weaver said, handing her a steaming travel mug. Black, no sugar, just like your statistical models. The joke was tentative, testing whether humor about her meticulous nature was now acceptable. Maya accepted both the coffee and the jest with a small smile. Predictable. Pattern recognition. The walk to the main building felt different with companions. Conversation flowed around topics both professional and personal. For the first time, rangers asked Maya about her background Coast Guard rescue experience, her doctoral research in statistical modeling of wilderness survival scenarios, her passion for improving search and rescue methodologies. "So that's why you're always buried in those algorithms," Calloway commented as they approached the command center. "You're not just tracking missing hikers. You're rewriting the entire rescue playbook." "Refining it," Maya corrected. "Traditional methods work in most cases. I'm just addressing the outliers. Like the Delmers," Weaver noted. "One hell of an outlier." Maya shook her head. "That's the point. They weren't as statistically improbable as everyone assumed. We've been using outdated models that underestimate human adaptability in survival situations." They entered the briefing room to find it already full. Director Blackwood stood at the front, next to a large screen displaying what appeared to be Maya's statistical model, pulled from her research files. Conversation hushed as she walked in, all eyes turning in her direction. "Dr. Chen," Blackwood acknowledged. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing your search algorithm and how it might be implemented more broadly." Maya moved toward the front, studying the display with critical eyes. "You accessed my research files?" "With good reason," Blackwood assured her. "What you've developed has potential applications beyond Mount Rainier. The regional director wants a full briefing, and we've had inquiries from 3 other national parks since yesterday's rescue hit the news." The room buzzed with this information. Maya's approach, long considered excessive and impractical, was suddenly the focus of serious professional interest. Rangers who had previously rolled their eyes at her data-driven methods now leaned forward, examining her algorithms with newfound respect. "Before we dive into the technical aspects," Blackwood continued, "I've received updates on the Delmer family. Mark's surgery was successful, though recovery will take months. The others are stable and improving." Sarah Delmer recorded a statement. "She asked me to share with the team." He tapped his tablet, and Sarah Delmar's face appeared on the screen. Though pale and clearly exhausted, her eyes burned with intensity as she spoke. "To the Mount Rainier rescue team, especially Dr. Maya Chen, thank you isn't adequate, but it's all I have right now. When Mark was injured during the storm, we lost our way trying to find shelter. The canyon seemed safer than the exposed ridge. But once we were down there, climbing out with his injury became impossible." Sarah paused, composing herself. "By day 5, we had accepted that we wouldn't be found. Mark explained the search statistics to us, how the probability of survival and rescue diminishes exponentially after the first 72 hours. We made peace with our situation, focusing only on surviving one more day, then another." Her voice strengthened. But Dr. Chen refused to accept those statistics. "She looked beyond the conventional wisdom and found us when everyone else had stopped looking. Our family has been given a second chance, because one person was willing to question assumptions that everyone else took for granted." The video ended, leaving the room in reflective silence. Maya felt uncomfortable with the spotlight, with being cast as some kind of maverick hero. She'd simply followed her methodology to its logical conclusion, the same approach she'd been advocating for years without recognition. "This is why we're implementing Dr. Chen's data integration protocols, effective immediately," Blackwood announced. "Beginning today, every search operation will include both traditional methods and statistical modeling. No more separate approaches, we need both working in tandem." He turned to Maya. "Doctor, we'd like you to walk us through your methodology. Not just the algorithms, but the thinking behind them. The assumptions you question that the rest of us take for granted." Maya hesitated, unaccustomed to having her ideas taken seriously by this audience. For years, she'd worked in isolation, developing her methods while being marginalized by the very people who now wanted her expertise. Ranger Calloway sensed her hesitation. "Look, Chen, we were wrong about your methods. Some of us were downright dismissive." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "But yesterday proved your approach saves lives, so teach us. Make us better." The simple honesty of his request broke through Maya's reserve. She moved to the front of the room and began explaining her search and rescue philosophy, not with resentment over past dismissals, but with the clear, methodical precision that characterized her approach to everything. "Standard survival models are built on historical averages," she began, pulling up her research on the screen. "They tell us the statistical likelihood of survival based on time elapsed, weather conditions, terrain difficulty, and victim demographics. These models are useful, but they have a fundamental flaw. They treat humans as consistent variables rather than adaptive agents." She displayed a graph showing survival probabilities over time. The conventional model shows survival probability dropping below 5% after 7 days in wilderness conditions. But when I reanalyzed historical data, I found something interesting. While most unsuccessful searches confirm this model, the successful rescues, after extended periods, often share specific characteristics that our standard approach overlooks. The room was silent. Rangers and technical staff alike focused intently on her presentation. Maya highlighted sections of her research, explaining how microterrain features, victim psychology, and environmental adaptation strategies created pockets of significantly higher survival probability, even in seemingly hopeless situations. The Delmers weren't an anomaly, she concluded. They fit a pattern that my model predicted: experienced outdoors people with specific knowledge of the area, taking shelter in a terrain feature that provided natural protection with access to water. My algorithm identified this pattern and calculated a small but significant survival window that extended beyond the standard model. Director Blackwood stepped forward. "So you're saying we give up too soon in some cases?" "Not exactly," Maya clarified. "Resources are limited, and most searches should follow standard protocols. But we need a supplementary approach for edge cases, a system that identifies when conventional wisdom might be wrong, when that extra day of searching or that overlooked drainage system might make the difference." The discussion that followed was unlike any professional exchange Maya had experienced at Mount Rainier. Instead of dismissing her ideas as excessive or impractical, her colleagues engaged with them, challenging assumptions not to undermine, but to understand. Technical questions were asked with genuine curiosity. Operational concerns were raised with respect for her expertise. For the first time, Maya wasn't the paranoid outsider with complicated theories. She was a valued specialist who's different. Perspective complemented the team's collective experience. As the meeting concluded, Director Blackwood announced the formation of a new data integration task force with Maya as its head. "This isn't just about implementing Dr. Chen's current models," he emphasized. "It's about developing a new approach to search and rescue that combines the best of traditional methods with cutting-edge data analysis. I want every ranger trained in both approaches." Rangers filed out of the room with a new sense of purpose, many stopping to speak with Maya, directly asking questions, suggesting collaborations, offering field experience to help refine her models. The isolation that had defined her professional life for so long was dissolving, replaced by genuine collegiality. Ranger Weaver lingered after the others had left. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've been calling you paranoid behind your back for 2 years." Maya nodded, unsurprised by the admission. "I know. But I'm starting to think that what looks like paranoia is actually just seeing patterns the rest of us miss." Weaver leaned against the table. "Like yesterday, you saw a pattern in the Delmer's behavior that suggested they'd take a route none of us considered likely. It wasn't intuition," Maya explained. Mark Delmar's online research showed interest in the canyon's mining history. Their previous hiking photos demonstrated a preference for historical routes rather than standard trails. The pattern was there in the data. But none of us looked for that pattern, Weaver pointed out. That's the difference. We saw a missing family and applied standard search protocols. You saw a puzzle with pieces we were overlooking. This characterization resonated with Maya more than being called a hero or miracle worker. She had always approached search and rescue as a complex system problem, where missing people left traces in both the physical environment and the digital one. I need to visit the hospital, Maya said, gathering her materials. The Delmers might remember details that could help refine the model. Weaver smiled, always collecting data. But maybe this time, just let them say thank you first? Maya considered this suggestion as she drove towards Seattle General Hospital. Throughout her career, she'd maintained professional distance from rescue outcomes, focusing on methodology rather than emotional impact. But the Delmers were different. Finding them had validated her entire approach, proving that what others dismissed as paranoia was actually precision. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge the human element of her work, not just as data points in a model, but as lives that continued beyond the statistical improbabilities she helped them overcome. The hospital room where the Delmers had been reunited was crowded with flowers, cards, and balloons. Public response to a survival story that had captured national attention. Mark Delmer lay in bed, his surgically repaired leg elevated. Sarah sat beside him, while teenagers Aiden and Emma occupied chairs near the window. They fell silent when Maya appeared in the doorway, then erupted in a chorus of exclamations and thanks. Sarah rushed forward to embrace her, a gesture Maya accepted awkwardly, still unaccustomed to such direct expressions of gratitude. Dr. Chen, Mark said, his voice stronger than it had been in the cave. The hospital staff said you requested a meeting. More data for your models? Maya nodded, appreciating his understanding of her purpose. If you're feeling up to it, your experience could help refine future search operations. Always the scientist, Sarah remarked with a warm smile. But before we become data points, we want to understand something. Why did you keep looking when everyone else stopped? The question caught Maya off guard. She'd prepared to discuss survival techniques, shelter construction, water collection methods, quantifiable factors she could incorporate into her algorithms. She hadn't expected to explain her own motivations. I followed the statistical evidence, she began, defaulting to her professional explanation. My models indicated a small but significant probability of survival in the Eastern Canyon area. Mom means why did you care enough to go alone, Emma clarified, her teenage directness cutting through Maya's technical response. Everyone else gave up on us, you didn't. Why? Maya considered the question carefully. The true answer was complex, partly professional dedication, partly intellectual conviction in her methods, partly the stubborn refusal to accept conventional limitations that had defined her career. But as she looked at the family before her alive, because she had questioned what everyone else accepted, she recognized a simpler truth beneath the complexity. Because possible isn't the same as probable, she said finally. And in search and rescue, that difference matters. It has to matter. Mark nodded slowly, understanding the philosophy behind her words. In my statistics classes, I teach students that improbable events happen all the time. 1 in a million chances occur every day simply because millions of chances exist. But it's different when you're the 1 in a million, isn't it? It's not about being special or defying the odds, Maya explained, warming to the topic. It's about recognizing that statistical models describe populations, not individuals. They tell us what usually happens, not what always happens. Sarah reached for her hand. Well, whatever your reasons, your paranoia saved our lives. And we'll never forget that. As Maya began her more formal questions about their survival strategies, she realized something had shifted within her. For years she'd developed her methodologies in isolation, convinced of their value but unable to persuade others. The validation she sought had always been professional recognition from colleagues, implementation of her systems, institutional change. But sitting here with the Delmers, seeing the direct impact of her work not as data points but as living, breathing people with futures ahead of them, Maya understood that the most meaningful validation came not from changing the system, but from changing outcomes. They had called her paranoid, until she found the survivors everyone thought were dead. And perhaps being called paranoid was a small price to pay for being right when it mattered most. The drive back from Seattle General Hospital gave Maya time to process her conversation with the Delmer family. Rain tapped steadily against the windshield, creating a rhythmic backdrop to her thoughts. Their gratitude had been genuine and overwhelming, but it was Mark Delmar's parting words that lingered in her mind. "Dr. Chen," he'd said as she prepared to leave, "people who question established methods are always labeled as paranoid or obsessive. But innovation never comes from those who blindly follow protocols. It comes from those willing to be misunderstood, while they create something better." The sentiment resonated with Maya's entire professional journey. Throughout her career, she'd endured skepticism, dismissal, and outright mockery for her insistence on data-driven approaches that challenged traditional search and rescue methods. Being labeled paranoid had been the most benign of the criticisms. But now, as she navigated the winding mountain road back to Mount Rainier National Park, Maya realized that perception was shifting. The success of the Delmer rescue had created a window of opportunity, a chance to transform search and rescue methodology not just at Mount Rainier, but potentially throughout the National Park Service. Her phone rang through the car's speakers. Director Blackwood's name appeared on the dashboard display. "Chen here," she answered. "How was the hospital visit?" Blackwood asked, his tone more collegial than it had ever been before. "Productive." The Delmers provided valuable insights on their survival strategies. "I'll integrate the data into the model." Good. Blackwood paused. "Listen, we've had some developments while you were away. The regional director visited base this afternoon. News of the rescue has reached Washington." Maya's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Washington State or Washington, D.C.? "Both. Actually, the Department of Interior is expressing interest in your methodology. They're sending a team next week to evaluate potential implementation across all national parks." The implications were significant. The Department of Interior oversaw the National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Fish and Wildlife. Service agencies responsible for hundreds of millions of acres and thousands of search and rescue operations annually. "That's unexpected," Maya managed, processing the sudden escalation of interest in her work. "It gets better," Blackwood continued. "They want you to prepare a comprehensive presentation on your data integration approach. Not just the algorithms, but the whole philosophy behind it. If they approve, this could become standard protocol nationwide." Maya navigated a sharp curve, buying time to compose her thoughts. After years of working in isolation, defending her methods against institutional resistance, this rapid embrace of her approach felt almost disorienting. "Sir, my models are still being refined. They're not ready for system-wide implementation." "None of our systems are perfect, Chen, but your approach just saved 4 lives that conventional methods wrote off as lost. That's enough to warrant serious consideration." After they disconnected, Maya drove in silence, contemplating the path ahead. For so long, her professional identity had been defined by opposition, the outsider pushing against established procedures, the voice questioning accepted limitations. Now suddenly, she faced the prospect of becoming the establishment herself, her methods potentially enshrined in official protocols. The responsibility was enormous. If her models were implemented nationally but proved less effective than the Dahmer case suggested, lives could be lost. Conversely, if she hesitated and the opportunity passed, future victims might not benefit from approaches that could save them. Maya arrived at base camp to find it transformed. The operations center hummed with unusual activity despite the late hour. Staff hunched over computers, analyzing data from her previous searches and comparing outcomes with standard protocols. In the conference room, rangers gathered around a large topographical display, discussing terrain features that traditional search methods might overlook, but her algorithms would flag. "There she is," Ranger Calloway called as Maya entered. "The woman of the hour." Maya set down her rain-soaked jacket. "What's happening here?" "Regional Director wants a retrospective analysis," Weaver explained, gesturing to the maps and data displays. "We're reviewing every search operation from the past 3 years, comparing standard procedures against what your model would have recommended." The implications were clear. They were testing whether earlier implementation of her methods might have changed other outcomes, whether other lives could have been saved. "Initial findings are fascinating," technical specialist Rodriguez added, handing Maya a tablet displaying preliminary results. "In most cases, your approach would have produced similar search patterns to our standard protocols. But in about 20% of cases, particularly those involving experienced hikers in complex terrain, your model suggests significantly different search areas." Maya scanned the data, noting cases where her algorithmic approach diverged most dramatically from traditional methods. These were precisely the scenarios she had designed her system to address: situations where standard assumptions broke down, where subtle patterns in victim behavior or environmental interaction created survival possibilities that conventional wisdom overlooked. "Have you analyzed case number 47B?" she asked, recalling a particularly troubling search from her first year at Mount Rainier. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The Johnston family. Father and son, missing 4 days. Found deceased on day 5. He pulled up the file on a nearby monitor. "According to your model, we should have searched the western drainage first, not the northern ridgeline." The room fell silent. Everyone remembered the Johnston case, an experienced father-son hiking team who died from exposure less than half a mile from a trail junction. The search had followed textbook protocols, but had focused on the wrong area during the critical first 48 hours. "Your model gives them a 62% survival probability if we had shifted resources to the western zone on day 2, Rodriguez continued. "That's significant." Maya felt no satisfaction in this validation. The knowledge that her methods might have saved lives in past operations carried a weight that overshadowed any professional vindication. "This is why the regional director is so interested," Director Blackwood said, entering the room. "It's not just about the Delmers. It's about changing how we approach every search operation going forward." He gestured for Maya to join him in his office. Once the door closed behind them, his official demeanor softened slightly. "I owe you an apology, Chen," he said, settling behind his desk. "For years, I treated your methods as excessive, your concerns as paranoid. I allowed that perception to influence operational decisions." Maya remained standing, uncomfortable with the personal turn in the conversation. "Sir, let me finish," Blackwood interrupted. "I've been running search and rescue operations for nearly 3 decades. I've developed certain instincts about what works and what doesn't. When you arrived with your algorithms and statistical models, challenging approaches I'd spent a career perfecting, it was easier to dismiss you than to question my own methods." He pushed a folder across the desk toward her. "But results speak for themselves. The Delmer rescue was extraordinary, but what these retrospective analyses suggest is even more significant. Your approach could fundamentally transform our success rates, especially in those edge cases where traditional methods fall short." Maya opened the folder to find official documentation for her new role. Data Integration Specialist with expanded authority and resources. No longer an adjunct to the main search operations, but a core component of the park's rescue infrastructure. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Blackwood replied. "The Department of Interior team arrives Monday. You have 3 days to prepare a presentation that could change search and rescue protocols across the entire national park system." No pressure. His attempt at humor did little to diminish the magnitude of the task ahead. Maya had spent years developing her methods in relative obscurity, refining algorithms and testing models without institutional support. Now she faced the challenge of articulating her entire approach, not just as a technical system, but as a philosophical shift in how rescue operations conceptualized human survival. "I'll need access to the National Search and Rescue Database," she said, "and case files from other parks, especially those with terrain profiles similar to Rainier." Blackwood nodded. "Already requested. Should have clearance by morning." He studied her with newfound respect. "You know, most people would be celebrating right now. Professional validation, institutional recognition, potential national impact. Yet here you are, immediately focused on improving the model." Maya considered this observation. It was true that personal accolades had never motivated her work. The driving force had always been methodological precision creating systems that saved lives by addressing the limitations of conventional approaches. "The model is still imperfect," she replied simply, "and people's lives depend on getting it right." As she left Blackwood's office, Maya found Ranger Calloway waiting outside, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by uncharacteristic hesitation. "Got a minute, Chen?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "What's on your mind, Calloway?" He walked silently for a moment, clearly organizing his thoughts. "That Johnston case we were discussing back there. I was team lead on that search." Maya nodded, recalling the case details. "I remember. We need someone to lead the data integration initiative across all park service units. Based on what we've seen today, you're clearly the right person for that role." The offer represented everything Maya had worked toward professionally: institutional recognition, resources to fully develop her methodologies, the opportunity to implement her approaches on a national scale. Yet she found herself hesitating. This would mean leaving field operations, she observed. Moving to Washington. Dr. Vasquez studied her with understanding. "You've developed these methods through direct field experience. It's natural to be reluctant to step away from the operational environment." She gestured toward the window, where Mount Rainier dominated the horizon. "But consider the impact. What you've created here could transform search and rescue across millions of acres, potentially saving hundreds of lives over time." The choice was more complex than simple career advancement. Maya had always defined herself through direct engagement with rescue operations, through the practical application of her methods in real-world scenarios. The administrative role would remove her from that immediate connection, placing her in policy meetings rather than field operations. Yet the potential impact was undeniable. What she had developed at Mount Rainier deserved broader implementation. Lives depended on it. "I'll need time to consider," Maya said finally. "Of course," Dr. Vasquez replied. "But don't take too long. Innovation like yours is too valuable to remain isolated in one park." As the officials filed out of the operations center, Director Blackwood approached Maya. "Quite an offer," he remarked. "National implementation of your methods, direct reporting to the Department of Interior leadership. Most people would jump at the opportunity. Most people haven't spent years being called paranoid for their methodological approach," Maya pointed out. Blackwood acknowledged this with a rueful nod. "Fair point. But perhaps that experience is precisely what qualifies you for this role. You've already proven you can persist with approaches you believe in, even when faced with institutional resistance." The observation resonated more deeply than Maya expected. Throughout her career, she had endured dismissal and skepticism while maintaining absolute conviction in her methods. That resilience, the willingness to be misunderstood while creating something better, might indeed be as valuable as her technical expertise in driving institutional change. As she packed up her presentation materials, Maya found herself at a crossroads unlike any she had faced before. The validation she had long sought was now being offered at the highest institutional level. The methods dismissed as paranoid were now recognized as innovative. The approach that had marked her as an outsider was now being embraced as the future of search and rescue. The journey from paranoia to pioneering was nearly complete. The question now was whether she would lead from the field or from the policy table, whether her greatest contribution would come through continued operational innovation or through systemic transformation of how search and rescue approached the fundamental challenge of finding those who might otherwise remain lost. What had begun with one family thought dead but found alive could now become a methodology that changed outcomes for countless others, if she was willing to embrace a role she had never imagined for herself. They had called her paranoid, until she found the survivors everyone thought were dead. And now they were asking her to teach others to see what she saw, to recognize patterns where others saw randomness, to perceive possibilities where others accepted limitations, to maintain hope where others assumed loss. Perhaps that journey from paranoia to pioneering was the most important search and rescue operation of all. The decision weighed on Maya throughout the evening after the Department of Interior presentation. She walked the perimeter trail around the Ranger compound, Mount Rainier's massive silhouette darkening against the sunset sky. The mountain had been her laboratory for 3 years, the place where her theories had evolved into practical methodologies, where dismissal had eventually transformed into validation. Now she faced the prospect of leaving it behind for conference rooms in Washington, D.C., for policy documents and budget meetings, for the slow work of institutional change rather than the immediate impact of field operations. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call. The hospital number appeared on the screen. "Dr. Chen speaking," she answered. "Dr. Chen, this is Emma Delmer." The teenager's voice sounded stronger than it had during the hospital visit. "I hope it's okay that I called. The nurses gave me your number." "Of course," Maya replied, surprised by the contact. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day. Dad's coming home tomorrow. The doctors say his recovery is ahead of schedule." A pause. "But that's not why I called. I saw you on the news tonight, the story about your rescue methods potentially being adopted nationwide." Maya hadn't realized the Department of Interior visit had attracted media attention. "Yes, they're considering implementing my approach across the National Park Service." "That's amazing," Emma said with genuine enthusiasm. "But the reporter mentioned you might be leaving Mount Rainier for a position in Washington. Is that true?" The direct question caught Maya off guard. "It's under consideration. The role would allow broader implementation of the search algorithms. But you'd be stuck behind a desk instead of finding people like us," Emma observed with teenage bluntness. "Doesn't seem like your style." The comment struck Maya as remarkably perceptive from someone who had only known her during a rescue operation and a brief hospital visit. "What makes you say that?" "When you found us in that cave," Emma explained, "you didn't act like someone who belongs in an office. You knew exactly what to do, how to help us, how to keep us alive until the helicopter came. That seemed like, I don't know, your element." Maya found herself considering the rescue from Emma's perspective, not as the validation of a statistical model, but as a human connection in a moment of extreme vulnerability. The administrative role would help implement systems that could save more people. "Maybe," Emma conceded, "but who's going to do what you do? Who's going to go looking when everyone else gives up?" The question lingered in Maya's mind long after they ended the call. Emma had identified something essential that Maya herself had been struggling to articulate the difference between creating systems and implementing them, between designing rescue protocols and actually finding people when all conventional approaches had failed. Maya returned to her cabin and opened her laptop, pulling up the official offer from the Department of Interior. The position was everything she should want: professionally, authority to implement her methodologies nationwide, resources to develop advanced integration systems, the opportunity to transform search and rescue at an institutional level. Yet Emma's question echoed, who's going to go looking when everyone else gives up? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Director Blackwood stood outside, his expression suggesting this wasn't a casual visit. "May I come in?" he asked. Maya gestured him inside, noting the folder tucked under his arm. "More from the Department of Interior?" "No, something else entirely." Blackwood set the folder on her desk. "This just came through from Olympic National Park. 2 experienced climbers missing for 6 days on Mount Olympus. Standard search. Protocols have found nothing. They're preparing to transition from rescue to recovery." Maya opened the folder, scanning the case details. 2 women, both highly experienced mountaineers, had attempted a challenging route on Mount Olympus's rarely climbed northern face. Their emergency beacon had activated briefly 6 days ago, then gone silent. Extensive aerial and ground searches had found no trace of them. "Why bring this to me?" Maya asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Because the Olympic team heard about the Delmer rescue. They've requested your assistance specifically, not just your models, but you. They want your eyes on this case before they call it." Maya spread the search maps across her desk, studying the terrain and previous search patterns. Mount Olympus was different from Rainier, more isolated, with denser forest approaches and complex glacial structures. But certain patterns in the initial data immediately caught her attention. "They've been focusing on the standard descent routes," she observed, assuming the climbers would have turned back when conditions deteriorated. But these women aren't typical recreational climbers. Their background suggests they'd be more likely to continue traversing laterally rather than abandoning the ascent entirely. Blackwood nodded. "That's exactly the kind of insight they're hoping for." The search coordinator there mentioned they've been applying conventional protocols, but feel like they're missing something. "I'd need to be on site," Maya said, already mentally calculating what equipment she would require. The terrain analysis requires direct observation, especially in an unfamiliar environment. "Transportation's arranged if you accept. Helicopter leaves at dawn." Blackwood studied her thoughtfully. "I know you're considering the Department of Interior position. This isn't meant to complicate that decision." But it did complicate the decision, and Maya suspected Blackwood knew that. The Olympic National Park request represented exactly the kind of scenario. Her methods were designed to address experienced outdoors people lost in complex terrain. CONVENTIONL search approaches failing to locate them, time running out for a successful rescue. "I'll go," she said decisively. "Let Olympic know I'll need their complete search data upon arrival, and access to the climber's personal information, social media, previous climb records, anything that might reveal behavioral patterns." Blackwood looked relieved. "I'll make the arrangements." "And Chen," he hesitated. "Whatever you decide about the Washington position, know that your work here has already changed how we approach search and rescue. That legacy remains regardless of where you go next." The helicopter lifted off from Mount Rainier as dawn broke the following morning. Maya sat beside the pilot, her equipment stowed securely, her tablet displaying the preliminary data from Olympic National Park. She had spent most of the night analyzing the search patterns already implemented, identifying gaps in coverage, and developing alternative models based on the climber's experience levels and known preferences. As the helicopter banked westward, Maya watched Mount Rainier recede behind them, the place where she had been labeled paranoid, where her methods had been dismissed, and where ultimately she had found vindication. Ahead lay a new mountain, a new search, and perhaps clarity about the path forward. Olympic National Park's search base camp had been established in a meadow near the Ho River trailhead. When Maya's helicopter touched down, she was met by search coordinator Lucas Bennett, a veteran ranger whose reputation for thorough operations was well known throughout the Park Service. "Dr. Chen," he greeted her, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. We've heard remarkable things about your work at Rainier." "I've reviewed your search data," Maya replied, foregoing small talk. "Your team has been thorough with standard protocols, but there are several high-probability zones that remain underexplored based on these climbers' specific profiles." Bennett nodded, unsurprised by her direct approach. "That's why we called you. We've run our standard playbook and come up empty. If there's another way to look at this situation, we need those eyes now. Time's running out." He led her to the operations tent where maps and search grids covered the walls. A team of rangers and technical specialists huddled around a topographical display discussing the day's search sectors. Conversation paused as Maya entered, all eyes turning toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to desperate hope. "This is Dr. Maya Chen from Mount Rainier," Bennett announced. "She's here to implement advanced search models that recently led to the successful rescue of the Delmer family after 9 days. I expect everyone to provide full cooperation and consider her input with the seriousness it deserves." Maya stepped forward, immediately focusing on the search map. "I need to understand exactly which areas have been physically searched versus scanned from the air. And I need more detailed information about Alexis Warren and Teresa Nguyen's climbing history, particularly their approach to route selection in adverse conditions." A technical specialist named Harper stepped forward with a tablet. "I've compiled their complete climbing records, including expedition journals from previous ascents. They're not typical recreational climbers. Both have extensive experience with technical ice climbing and have successfully completed routes that most mountaineers would consider beyond reasonable risk thresholds." This confirmed Maya's initial assessment. These weren't climbers who would simply turn back when conditions deteriorated. They would adapt, adjust their route, perhaps attempt traverses that conventional wisdom would consider too dangerous. "Show me the point where their emergency beacon activated," Maya requested. Bennett indicated a location high on Mount Olympus's northern face. "Single transmission, approximately 6 days ago at 2:17 p.m., nothing since. Weather was deteriorating rapidly at that time, visibility near zero, temperatures dropping, heavy snowfall beginning." Maya studied the topography surrounding the last known location. "Your search has focused primarily on the standard descent routes to the east and west, correct?" "That's protocol," Bennett confirmed. "Experienced climbers would normally attempt to descend via established routes when conditions worsen. But these aren't normal climbers," Maya countered. "Based on their profiles, I see a different pattern. Looking at their previous expeditions, Warren and Nguyen consistently choose the path of interesting challenge over the path of conventional safety. When faced with deteriorating conditions, they're more likely to seek an interesting solution rather than a standard retreat." She traced a route on the map that no one had seriously considered, a traversing path that moved north rather than descending, following a series of ice fields and narrow ledges that would be invisible from aerial surveys and extremely difficult to access from below. "This route matches their behavioral pattern from previous climbs," Maya explained. "It's technically challenging, but potentially navigable for climbers of their caliber. More importantly, it leads to several caves and protected overhangs that could provide shelter during severe weather." Bennett studied the proposed route with growing interest. "That area hasn't been thoroughly searched. We did an aerial pass, but visibility was poor, and the terrain makes ground access extremely difficult, which is precisely why they might have chosen it, Maya pointed out, and why they might still be alive. If they found adequate shelter in that zone, they could have survived the storm. Their emergency supplies would be depleted by now, but given their experience level and the presence of snow for water, survival remains possible. The tent had fallen completely silent, rangers and specialists absorbing the implications of Maya's analysis. She wasn't simply suggesting a missed search area, she was proposing an entirely different way of thinking about how these particular climbers would respond to crisis. We'd need technical climbing teams, Bennett said, already shifting to implementation mode. The approach would be challenging, especially with current conditions. I'll go, Maya stated firmly. I need to see the terrain directly to refine the search parameters. Bennett looked surprised. Dr. Chen, with all due respect, that route requires advanced alpine climbing skills. It's not a standard search approach. I have the necessary technical qualifications, Maya replied. Coast Guard rescue training included alpine operations. And my search methodology works best when I can directly observe environmental patterns. That might not be apparent from base camp analysis. There was a moment of hesitation as Bennett weighed the risks against the potential benefits. Finally, he nodded. We'll assemble a technical team. Departure in 1 hour. As preparations began, Maya stepped outside the operations tent, needing a moment to refocus. The Olympic Mountains rose before her, jagged peaks partially obscured by clouds. Somewhere on those remote slopes, 2 women might still be alive. Defying probability and conventional wisdom, much like the Delmers had on Mount Rainier. A ranger approached, introducing himself as Chief Technical Climber Marcus Reynolds. I'll be leading the climb to the search zone you identified, he said. Bennett mentioned you're planning to join us. That's correct. Reynolds studied her with the assessing eye of someone responsible for team safety in extreme conditions. It's serious technical terrain. Mixed ice and rock climbing, potential avalanche conditions, limited rescue options if things go wrong. I'm aware of the risks, Maya assured him. But direct observation is crucial for refining the search parameters. Patterns emerge on-site that can't be predicted from base camp analysis. Reynolds nodded slowly. Bennett shared what you did at Rainier. Finding that family when everyone else had given up, he checked his climbing harness methodically. If Warren and Nguyen are where you think they might be, we'll need every advantage to find them. The technical team departed an hour later. 4 experienced climbers plus Maya, equipped for mixed alpine conditions and potential emergency response. The approach began with a helicopter drop at the highest feasible landing zone, followed by several hours of increasingly technical climbing toward the search area Maya had identified. As they ascended, the weather deteriorated, visibility dropping, wind increasing, temperatures falling. Conventional wisdom would recommend turning back, but Maya pressed forward, her focus absolute. Each rope length brought them closer to the traversing route she believed the missing climbers might have taken. Conditions are worsening, Reynolds called over the wind after several hours of climbing. We should consider our turnaround time. Maya paused, anchoring herself to the ice face. The model indicates highest probability in the next section. If they sought shelter, it would most likely be in the cave systems approximately 200 meters ahead. Reynolds studied her through snow-crusted goggles. You're certain about this? I'm certain that based on their behavioral patterns and the available terrain options, this represents their most likely survival path, Maya clarified. Certainty isn't possible in search and rescue. We operate on probability assessments and informed analysis. The honesty of her response seemed to reassure Reynolds more than false confidence would have. He nodded. 2 more rope lengths, then we reassess based on conditions. They continued upward through deteriorating weather, the climbing becoming increasingly technical. Maya moved with the precise efficiency that characterized her approach to everything, each placement deliberate, Each movement calculated, her attention divided between the immediate demands of the climb and the broader search pattern she was mentally mapping. As they traversed into the zone her model had identified, Maya began noticing subtle signs that human passage had disturbed the natural environment: a cramp and scratch on exposed rock where the snow had blown clear, a small depression in a snow drift that suggested recent compression, an ice axe mark that didn't match the natural fracture patterns of the surrounding ice. "Someone's been through here," she called to Reynolds, indicating the signs. "Recently." Reynolds examined the marks, his experienced eye confirming her assessment. "Not from previous search teams. We haven't reached this area before." Hope, the commodity most depleted in extended search operations, began to rise among the team. They pushed forward with renewed energy, moving along the traversing path that Maya's analysis had identified as matching the missing climber's likely behavior. The traverse led to a section of broken ice formations, where the mountain's face fractured into a complex maze of crevices, overhangs, and small cave entrances. Under normal circumstances, climbers would avoid such terrain due to its instability. But in desperate weather conditions, it would offer potential shelter options. "We need to check each possible shelter location," Maya directed. "Prioritize caves and overhangs large enough to accommodate 2 people." The team spread out within safe communication distance, each climber anchored securely while investigating potential shelter sites. Maya focused on a particular ice formation that matched patterns she had observed in Warren and Nguyen's previous expedition journals, a preference for protected positions with defensible approaches. Near a narrow crevice, partially protected by an overhanging ice shelf, Maya noticed something that stopped her breath: a small strip of high-visibility orange fabric, the kind used in technical climbing equipment, wedged into a crack as if deliberately placed. "I found something," she called to Reynolds, who was investigating a nearby formation. As Reynolds moved carefully toward her position, Maya examined the surrounding area more closely. The entrance to the crevice showed signs of recent activity: snow cleared away, ice tool marks around the opening, deliberate patterning that suggested human intervention rather than natural processes. "Hello," she called into the dark opening. "Search and rescue. Is anyone there?" The silence stretched, broken only by the howling wind. Maya reached for her headlamp, aiming the beam into the darkness. The light revealed a narrow passage extending deeper into the mountain face, widening slightly after several meters. "I'm going to check inside," she told Reynolds, who had now reached her position. "I'll set up a safety line," he replied, immediately preparing an anchor system. Secured by the rope, Maya carefully entered the crevice, her movements slow and deliberate in the confined space. The passage continued for approximately 10 meters before opening into a small cave-like chamber in the ice. Her headlamp illuminated the scene in stark detail: 2 figures huddled together under emergency blankets and climbing equipment, surrounded by the careful organization of limited supplies. Both women were alive but clearly in distress: hypothermic, dehydrated, conserving energy with minimal movement. "Teresa Nguyen? Alexis Warren?" Maya called softly. "Olympic National Park Search and Rescue. We're here to help you." "One of..." The woman lifted her head weakly, her face showing disbelief transforming into desperate hope. How did you find us?" Her voice was barely audible, hoarse from dehydration and cold. "We looked where others didn't," Maya replied simply, already assessing their medical condition while activating her emergency communication system. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." The rescue operation that followed was among the most technically challenging in Olympic National Park's history. Extracting 2 severely weakened climbers from a remote ice cave during deteriorating weather conditions required every skill the team possessed. Maya worked alongside the technical rescuers, her training from Coast Guard days emerging in the practiced efficiency of her emergency care and evacuation planning. Throughout the complex extraction, she maintained the same methodical focus that characterized her analytical work, each decision precise, each action deliberate, every contingency anticipated before it arose. By the time they reached the helicopter evacuation point, with both climbers secured in specialized stretchers, Maya had already documented the entire rescue process for future model refinement. "You were right," Reynolds said as they watched. The medical helicopter lift off, carrying Warren and Nguyen to emergency care. About everything. Where they'd go, why they'd choose that route, how they'd seek shelter. It was like you could see what no one else could see. Maya shook her head. "I didn't see anything magical. I just analyzed their behavioral patterns and applied them to the environmental conditions. Anyone could do it with the right training and methodology." "That's where you're wrong," Reynolds countered. "What you did wasn't just follow a methodology. You thought like they would think. You saw possibilities where everyone else saw only standard protocols. That's not something you can just teach in a training manual." As they descended toward base camp, Maya considered Reynolds' observation. Perhaps her approach wasn't purely algorithmic after all. The mathematical models and statistical analyses were crucial tools, but they were guided by something more intuitive, a willingness to see beyond conventional assumptions, to recognize that human behavior in crisis rarely followed predictable patterns. Base camp erupted in celebration when news of the successful rescue reached them. Ranger Bennett greeted the returning team with uncharacteristic emotion, clasping Maya's hand in both of his. "Dr. Chen, what you accomplished today." He struggled to find adequate words. "We had given up hope. We're preparing to tell their families we couldn't find them." "The team did the hard work," Maya deflected. "I just suggested where to look." "You did far more than that," Bennett insisted. "You changed how we think about search and rescue. Showed us that our standard protocols, while valuable, have limitations we hadn't fully recognized." The sentiment echoed what she had heard at Mount Rainier after the Delmer rescue acknowledgement, that her approach represented not just a technical improvement, but a fundamental shift in perspective about what was possible in search and rescue operations. Later that evening, as Maya prepared for the return flight to Mount Rainier, her phone rang. Dr. Vasquez from the Department of Interior was calling for an update on her decision regarding the Washington position. "I've heard about the Olympic rescue," Vasquez said when Maya answered. "Another remarkable success. Your methods have now saved 6 lives that conventional approaches had essentially abandoned." "The Olympic team deserves most of the credit," Maya replied. "They were willing to pursue an unconventional search strategy based on limited evidence. Because you showed them it could work," Vasquez countered. "Which is exactly why we need you in Washington, to bring that perspective to national policy. To transform how search and rescue operates across the entire system." The offer remained compelling at a rational level, the opportunity to implement her methodologies nationwide, to potentially save many more lives through institutional transformation. Yet Maya's experiences over the past days had clarified something important about her own role in that transformation. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm deeply honored by the offer," she began carefully. "But I've come to realize something important about my work. The models and algorithms are only part of the equation. Their effectiveness depends on direct field implementation by someone willing to see beyond conventional assumptions." "You're declining the position," Vasquez surmised. "I'm suggesting a modification," Maya clarified. "I'll develop the national training program, design the implementation protocols, and serve as a consultant to the department. But my primary role should remain in the field, not just at Mount Rainier, but as a rapid response specialist for cases where conventional methods have failed." There was a thoughtful pause on the other end. "A search and rescue troubleshooter, deployed to the most challenging cases nationwide. Is that what you're proposing?" "Exactly. The system needs both components better, protocols for standard operations, and specialized approaches for cases that fall outside conventional parameters. I can design the former, but I believe my greatest value lies in implementing the latter." To Maya's surprise, Dr. Vasquez laughed softly. "You know, when Director Blackwood first described you, he said you'd never be satisfied with a desk job. That your mind worked differently, always seeing patterns others missed, always questioning assumptions others accepted. He said you'd and called paranoid for years because of it." "That's a fair assessment," Maya acknowledged. "Well, perhaps what the National Park Service needs is precisely that kind of paranoia, especially when it saves lives that would otherwise be lost." Vasquez's tone grew more serious. "I'll present your counterproposal to the committee. A dual role developing the national protocols while maintaining field operations for specialized cases. It's unconventional, but so is everything about your approach." When the call ended, Maya stood at the edge of the Olympic National Park base camp, watching as darkness settled over the mountains. Somewhere in those peaks, just days ago, two experienced climbers had made choices that defied conventional wisdom, surviving against overwhelming odds until someone was willing to look beyond standard assumptions to find them. Perhaps that was the true essence of her work, not just developing better search algorithms, but fundamentally challenging the limitations that rescue operations placed on themselves. Seeing possibility where others saw only probability. Hope where others saw only statistics. They had called her paranoid. Until she found the survivors everyone thought were dead. And perhaps being called paranoid was a small price to pay for. The privilege of proving that sometimes the impossible was merely the improbable, waiting for someone willing to look a little harder, think a little differently, and refuse to accept that any search was truly hopeless until every possibility had been exhausted. 6 months later, Maya stood in a different operations center, this one at Yosemite National Park, where 3 days earlier 2 young hikers had vanished in a remote canyon system. Standard search protocols had found no trace of them, and conventional wisdom suggested they had been swept away in a flash flood that tore through the area shortly after their disappearance. Dr. Chen, the Yosemite search coordinator, greeted her. "Thank you for coming. We've implemented the national protocols. You developed extensive grid searches, probability mapping, behavioral analysis. Nothing has worked." Maya studied the search maps, the terrain features, the last known locations. "Tell me about these hikers, not just their experience level, but who they are as people. What motivates them, how they think." The question was not part of standard search protocol, but in the 6 months since the Olympic rescue, Maya's approach had gained recognition throughout the National Park Service. When conventional methods failed, when hope dwindled, when statistics suggested the search should transition to recovery, that was when they called Dr. Maya Chen. Because sometimes, what looks like paranoia is actually just seeing what others miss, and sometimes, those who persist when everyone else gives up are the only ones who find what no one else can find. If you enjoyed this inspirational true story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. From which country are you watching? Let us know in the comments below. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.